Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
All right. Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Nick Castell. I'm a reporter with WCPN and WVIZ IdeaStream. I'm pleased to be here to moderate our panel conversation about the year ahead in politics. If you came here expecting to hear from Betty Sutton, it is the politics of the moment that force a change in the schedule. This week, she announced she's joining Rich Cordray's ticket in the Democratic Party primary in the race for Ohio governor, though I have a hard time believing that was actually this week because so much has happened. And since Cordray spoke here last month, her appearance on behalf of the campaign was no longer appropriate or fair to the other campaigns. So instead, we're going to look ahead to 2018. We've got congressional races, a Senate race, elections in every statewide office, governor, auditor, attorney general, treasurer, secretary of state. And there are no incumbents in any of those races. And of course, this is all happening as we begin the second year of the Trump presidency, as Republicans and Democrats try to either maintain or take a hold of power in Congress. So here to help us understand what's ahead, we've got a panel of political observers. In the middle is Cinder Miller-Cole, an instructor at the University of Akron's Racy Bliss Institute of Applied Politics. She received her BA and master's from the University of Akron. Henry Gomez, to my left, covers the National Republican Party for BuzzFeed, and for many years he covered politics for Cleveland.com and The Plain Dealer, as you well know. And Karen Kassler is the State House Bureau Chief for Ohio Public Radio and Television, and my colleague at IdeaStream. So thanks so much for being here. Karen, I want to start with you. Looking at the governor's race this year, what issues do you think are really going to come up and characterize this race?
Well, in previous years, I would have said the economy, because that's usually the issue that drives everything. I think this year it's got to be President Trump. I think his influence has already been felt. I mean, just this week, Jim Renacci leaving the governor's race and going into the U.S. Senate race, saying it was the White House and Donald Trump who asked him to do that. Already the Democrats have been campaigning on the presidency of Donald Trump. I mean, I think he is going to be a huge shadow over this campaign on both sides. I think you're going to see in the Republican primary, you've got two candidates in Mary Taylor and Mike Dewine who are going to be talking about Donald Trump. Mary Taylor's very closely aligned herself with Trump. Mike Dewine has been a little bit away from that. And then, like I said, the Democrats are definitely campaigning against Trump. What will be interesting to see is the role that the current governor, John Kasich, will play. I think the Democrats will be bringing him up. But whether he will be brought up on the Republican side remains to be seen, I think. They've been avoiding talking about him.
Well, Cinder, I want to ask you about that because how much do you think these candidates so far have talked about Governor Kasich? Do you expect Republicans to talk about him very much at all?
I don't, actually. I mean, his numbers are polling pretty consistently, both approval and disapproval, somewhere in the 40s. So, I mean, I don't know that it is to anybody's real advantage to be bringing him up or talking about their relationship or lack thereof with the current administration. I think I mean, it depends. It depends. I could see Mike Dewine bringing it up as it relates to Mary Taylor's relationship with the governor. I don't know. I mean, like Karen said, she's doing a fine job of aligning herself with the president. So, you know, you can see where she's trying to cast her net right now. But
is that unusual? He's the two-term governor. He's currently occupying that office that they want to hold. Don't you think they would talk about his legacy and whether they want to continue it or change it?
They've talked about his legacy specifically with Medicaid expansion and how they don't want to continue that. So that's very interesting right there. I think John Kasich is a lot more popular in polls and in the national media than he is among Republicans who are likely to turn out for the primary. And I think you're going to see more Republicans who are likely to turn out in the primary be voting on their thoughts about Donald Trump. I mean, there are a lot of Republicans in the state who are still angry at John Kasich for not supporting Donald Trump, for not supporting him, not coming to the convention last year, not supporting him in the end, speaking out against him even to this day for the most part. These are likely Republican voters in the primary, and I think that's important to mention.
Now, Henry, you have covered members of Congress who either do or don't want President Trump to campaign for them, depending on how Hillary Clinton did in their district last year, or in 2016 rather. How do you think it's going to play out in Ohio? Do you think Republicans will be embracing Trump?
I think that we're seeing already that some of them are. Interesting that Mary Taylor is aligning herself with Donald Trump. John Kasich actually endorsed her well over a year ago. And now that there's only two candidates left in that Republican field, she's kind of running away from Kasich. She's speaking out about Medicaid expansion. She's made it pretty clear that that's not an endorsement she necessarily wants to brag about. But you're seeing Jim Renacci, who until this week was a candidate for governor, really align himself with Trump. He had a tweet a couple weeks ago, at least it feels like a couple weeks ago, it could have been yesterday, about how great time at the White House last night. We saw this great movie. I got to talk to the president in the Oval Office. Like it basically said, I got to hang out with President Trump last night 3 times in the tweet. And it was, it was as subtle as a brick to the head. And then Renacci made his entry into the Senate race this week contingent on support from Donald Trump. And he did that because Renacci's whole brand for running for governor was, I hate DC, I hate Washington, it's terrible, I'm miserable there, I want to come back to Ohio and fix things in Columbus. And then this Senate race spot opens up because of Mandel dropping out, and the reason Renacci pushed the White House to support him was because he needed that cover to then go and run for a job that's in DC. And he appears to have gotten that from the White House. He had a meeting there earlier this week, and the next day announced that he was running for Senate instead. So you're going to see Renacci want Trump here for him, especially during the primary. And in the general election, maybe that helps him against Sherrod Brown. So I think you're going to see the Republicans run more toward Trump than toward Kasich. And the congressional districts, I don't know that Trump will be helpful in all of them, but they might not need him because most of the congressional districts in Ohio are drawn in a way that there's not going to be a lot of room for the challenging party to win.
Karen, when you look at the campaign that Rob Portman ran for Senate just 2 years ago, seemed like he wanted to talk about anything but Donald Trump when he was running for president. Now we've got a candidate in Jim Renacci who's running toward Trump. What do you think changed?
Well, 2016, obviously. When Donald Trump took Ohio, that changed a lot. And there were 2 counties that were very important in that, and they are Trumbull County and Montgomery County. They flipped from Democrat to Republican from 2012 to 2016. And those were really important counties, especially that Youngstown area turned out to be extremely important. So I think it is very interesting to watch Rob Portman now. He's got a long time before he has to stand for re-election again. And so he's been doing some things that I think a lot of people have been wondering about. For instance, endorsing Josh Mandel very early in the race, even long before the primary. I mean, it was way last year, and now Mandel's out. So I think that Rob Portman's interesting to watch here.
Well, Sindra, when you look at the electoral map in Ohio, you had counties like Trumbull County. I've got marked down here. Erie County was plus 12 for Obama in 2012, and it was plus 10 for Trump. Meanwhile, you've got counties like Franklin and Hamilton County that were actually more pro-Hillary Clinton than they were for Obama in 2012. How do you see the Ohio electoral map changing, and do you think Democrats and Republicans are trying to adapt how they campaign to that?
I mean, Ohio is known as a bellwether state for a reason. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if some of those counties do flip back based on the statewide results here that we're going to be seeing in November. But at the same time, I mean, if you look at the president's numbers and where he's polling among likely Republican primary voters, he's still polling very high. So, I mean, I don't know. I guess my answer to that question really is I don't know. I think that a lot could happen between now and November.
Well, and I want to add, too, that typically in off-year elections, the state has been redder. I mean, more Republican voters have turned out in off-year elections. That's how we got the Republican tsunami, as some people called it, in 2010, when Republicans took all these offices. These are the Republicans who are now leaving these offices and going into other offices to run. So unless Democrats really mobilize their base and get their base out in this off-year election, this midterm election, it's looking like it's going to be a good year for Democrats. But in Ohio, Republicans have been the ones who typically have turned out in these midterm election years.
Well, Henry, let's turn our attention then to the Democrats. Next week, it's said that we're going to see Dennis Kucinich enter the governor's race. Certainly, he's known as being, on the progressive side of things as a Democrat, but he's also done some unusual things for a Democrat in this climate. He was a Fox News contributor, and from that position, he often questioned and criticized the Russia investigation. Do you think those kind of issues are going to come up as he's trying to win Democrats in 2018?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're going to come up. I think that Kucinich is really, his entry into this race is going to be a problem for the rest of the party that it wants to win in November. I don't think Dennis Kucinich at the outset is their strongest candidate heading toward November. I think that you're seeing with Betty Sutton joining up with Rich Cordray, with Nan Whaley dropping out of the race, and I believe supporting Rich Cordray, that seems to be where a lot of the momentum is heading. But Kucinich has name recognition. He also is still very well known in Cleveland, which is the Lions, Northeast Ohio. The media market is the Lions' share of the votes in Ohio. And it's going to be still a crowded primary of 4 or 5 candidates. So if you're Rich Cordray, you're probably going to spend a lot of money emphasizing those things you just mentioned, his tenure at Fox News, the fact that he praised President Trump's inaugural address last year, the fact of his relationship with Syria, some of these other things that aren't exactly in the base for Ohio Democrats. So I think that's going to come up in the primary. I think it has to if Cordray wants to win. I think he's going to have to spend a lot of money to campaign. I think Kucinich is going to be one of his strongest rivals.
So do you see this as being maybe a contentious primary for Democrats?
I think it's going to get that way. I mean, it was funny because we were talking backstage about Cordray's tweets, which are kind of interesting. If you haven't been following Richard Cordray on Twitter, follow him, because it's like, Jack Handy's Deep Thoughts from Saturday Night Live meets Cheech and Chong, and it's they're interesting, and in a way they're kind of this wholesome antidote to President Trump's tweets, but they're also a little out there. But one of them was, I guess it looks like we have competition now. And it was like the day after Dennis Kucinich filed his paperwork signifying he was most likely going to run, which to me, that was like, so does this mean you didn't think you had competition before with Connie Pillich and Nan Whaley and Betty Sutton obviously joined with them, but Bill O'Neill, it made it, I'm reading into that he sees Kucinich as his first real opponent.
It's a bit of a subtweet.
Exactly. That's what the
and Joe Schiavone is still in the race. But I think there was a thought there for a while that back when you think about like September, when we were talking about the 4 who'd been in the race, these people who had been working for months, and then all of a sudden we were talking about Richard Cordray and Jerry Springer. And that was going to be the big competition. All right, and then Jerry Springer.
That seems like years ago already.
I know, doesn't it? And then Jerry Springer took himself out of it. And it almost seemed, I think, to some Democrats like Richard Cordray is going to be the guy. The other candidates, they've done a good job, but if Cordray comes in, then he's going to be the guy. Well, now all of a sudden you have Dennis Kucinich expressing an interest, which he was all of last year, but he just wasn't talking about it. He was doing public events. He was going out to community meetings. He was talking about charter schools, doing all these things, and he actually endorsed the drug price issue 2. But every time we would ask him, are you running for governor? I'm not here to talk about that, which a lot of us read as, oh, you are, you're just not ready to talk about that.
Or he's here to not talk about that.
No, exactly. He's here to be out there. And so I think the people who didn't take him seriously did so at their peril. And also Bill O'Neill, he had been talking for a solid year. He's the Supreme Court, the only Democrat in elected statewide office. Bill O'Neill had been talking about this for a year, saying he was going to think about it for a whole year, and if Richard Cordray got in, he was going to get out. Well, then Cordray got in, and O'Neill said, well, Cordray's not endorsing my plan to legalize marijuana, so I'm going to stay in, which was interesting, and it's very, very interesting to hear a sitting Supreme Court justice talk about policy issues like marijuana and solar power and some of the other issues he's brought up. And so there was actually a move at the State House to try to remove him from the bench. He's supposed to leave January 26th, right before he's supposed to appear here at the City Club and talk on January 30th. So I don't know if that's going to happen, if state lawmakers are actually going to try to take him out before he gets a chance to leave on his own.
Well, Cinder, what do you think the Democrats are going to try to plan to do here to retake some of these statewide offices that they haven't held in a long time?
Before I answer that real
Yeah.
quick, I wanted to add on to the last question. I think the interesting thing about Dennis Kucinich is, all along we've been talking about what have Republicans learned from Trump? What have we learned about campaigning as a result of President Trump's candidacy and how he ran things? And, so you have different candidates who are talking about whether or not they're going to use the Trump model. And, is that going to work for me? Is that what I want to do? And I think Kucinich is one of those candidates who, as a Democrat, is actually looking at the Trump model and thinking, okay, is this something that maybe I should look at employing as one of the few Democrats across the country that may be looking at having such a model? So, your question again.
Well, actually, I think that begins to address that question of,
Right.
how do Democrats think that they can win statewide office in a state that Trump won by 8 points
Right.
or in 16?
I mean, I think what Karen said at the beginning, it's all going to have to be about the issues, and if they're looking at distancing themselves from the president, it's going to have to be issues that here are hitting in Ohio. Okay, President Trump campaigned all along that he was going to bring back coal jobs, and he really got a lot of that labor support that maybe some of the other Republican presidential candidates would not have been able to get. Well, Betty Sutton is a labor darling, so I'm assuming that they'll bring up some of those issues and his lack of movement on them.
Mm-hmm. Henry?
It's kind of a tough position if you're David Pepper, the chair of the Ohio Democratic Party. He inherited a fractious party after the 2014 gubernatorial election, and one of the things that he made a point of going into this cycle was, the party was going to stop putting such a heavy thumb on the scale during primaries. We saw during the Senate race in 2016 with Ted Strickland, there were some people that were unhappy that PG Sittenfeld maybe wasn't given a chance to shine as much as a young Democratic office holder should. The field was mostly clear for Ted Strickland, and it was not a very good result for Democrats at all. And so Pepper has heard from members of the party about this, and so he's kind of kept a hands-off approach, which means we haven't seen a lot of the horse trading that typically goes on. And it's not going on the Republican side really either, but we did see Cordray and Sutton team up. We did see Dewine and Houston team up. But we haven't seen some of these other Democrats have some interesting candidates running for governor, but they all want to run for they all wanted to run for governor. Joe Schiavone couldn't be talked into running for attorney general or for auditor. Connie Pillich, who ran for treasurer last time, apparently couldn't be talked in to running for anything lower, or nobody was having those conversations because David Pepper and some of the other party leaders don't want to look like they're forcing people out. And now you're at this point where Nan Whaley is dropping out. Is she going to run for something down ticket? I think she'd be a strong candidate for Democrats if she did. You have one woman left running for governor on the Democratic side. David Pepper can't talk Connie Pillich out of the race now. How's that going to look? I mean, and Connie Pillich is a talented candidate too. She was the bright spot on the Democratic ticket in 2014. So
Right.
they do kind of have this top-heavy bench, and they're I think down ticket they're going to have some problems because of it.
Well, Karen,
This whole
yeah.
idea of David Pepper not wanting to do this, exactly that issue of 2016 when the Democratic Party endorsed Ted Strickland, one of the loudest voices against that was Bill O'Neill. He went on Facebook, where he confesses a lot of things, and said that he thought that the Democratic Party was crazy, that they were expecting the same result that they had gotten in the past, and the inmates were running the asylum or whatever he had said. And he turned out to be absolutely right. And so the idea of him being talked out of the governor's race at this point seems very unlikely, because I think he may be there almost to prove a point, almost to say, I think the party needs to have new leadership. He's got a really strong name that he runs under, O'Neill, and he unseated a sitting Republican Supreme Court justice when he ran with almost no money. So he's not somebody to completely disregard, though his statements and his ideas are a little bit, well, they're interesting. Let's just put it that way.
I want to turn our attention to the Senate race here. And Cinder, when you look at Sherrod Brown's reelection bid, and he'll either face probably Jim Renacci or Mike Gibbons, I've got to imagine that campaign is going to attract a lot of the attention and the money. Do you think it's going to be hard for these down ballot candidates to get attention and money, given that there's this huge high-profile Senate race kind of over their heads?
I do. I think that there's going to be a lot of money again in Ohio. It's not the Ohio Senate seat right now is still not listed as toss-up, according to most of the folks that are out there. Most of the talking heads, it's not in any of those columns. But I mean, I have to believe that because of the president's polling in Ohio currently and how strong he still is here, that the Democrats are going to put a significant amount of money to make sure that Sherrod Brown is safe, that he is reelected. But you also don't know what those conversations were with Jim Renacci. How much was promised to him to run? How much then are Republicans going to be pouring in here? Are the Democrats going to have to up their ante too? Even though, like I said, I expect them to spend a great deal anyways. And then the gubernatorial candidates. I mean, are they going to, depending on who wins, it's like, does the Democrat run with Sherrod Brown? Like, are they a strong, unified team, or are they running on separate issues? The same with the Republican. Depending on which Republican wins, if Mary Taylor wins, it's probably easy for her to stand up and have a unified ticket with Jim Renacci because they were talking about similar things in the gubernatorial primary. What about Mike Dewine? Is that a different? I think it'll be very interesting to see who comes out of these primaries and how they're running.
The Senate race
Karen.
already stacks up, in my opinion, to be, 2012 was the most expensive Senate race in Ohio history. This one's probably going to be more expensive. Just look at the primary. When you've got Mike Gibbons saying he'll spend $5 million of his own money. Jim Renacci is the 41st richest member of Congress coming into this race. That's just the primary. Sherrod Brown has $10 million in the bank right now. So this is potentially a very expensive Senate race coming up.
And that's not even counting super PACs or dark money or all
exactly.
the other
Yep.
surreptitious ways that money is spent in an election. Henry, do you think that Sherrod Brown is going to have a tough challenge here from the Republican?
I think actually it might be a little bit tougher for him now than it was when Josh Mandel was the likely nominee a week ago. This broke about a week ago right now that Josh Mandel was dropping out of the race. It would have been a rematch of 2012. Brown's campaign team is his campaign manager was his campaign communications director during that 2012 race. They have studied Josh Mandel. They have a thick book on Josh Mandel. They know exactly what type of campaign to run against Josh Mandel, and now they don't get to run that campaign. And I've been talking with some of my Democratic sources in Ohio over the last week. I think some of it's lowering expectations, and I think some of it is genuine. This isn't going to be as easy as we thought it was. Now, that said, before Mandel dropped out, I hadn't talked to one national Republican who thought the Ohio Senate race was a marquee race going into 2018. There are some other states where the Republicans really have to defend their turf, like Nevada. There are other states like Missouri where they have a really good shot at picking up a seat that's been held by a Democrat. And also, it's a credit to Sherrod Brown, who a lot of Republicans think is close to unbeatable. He is a known quantity here. He also has some of that populist appeal that helped Donald Trump, and possibly more authentic than Donald Trump's brand of populism, because it's been a part of Sherrod Brown's political identity for so long. People know that about him. So it might get a little easier for the Republicans if they do get Jim Renacci as their nominee, or if they do draft a J.D. Vance into the race and he ends up becoming the nominee, because you have somebody who's a little bit more of a blank slate than Josh Mandel, who might energize or excite the Republican base more than Josh Mandel would. And again, somebody that Sherrod Brown hasn't run against before. So,
how do you think he's going to have to campaign in relation to Donald Trump? Do you think Sherrod Brown is going to have to really attack Trump in his campaign, or maybe he should try to go easy on him given the popularity the president has here?
I think he's done it already. After the election in 2016, I think it was like maybe the Monday after, Sherrod Brown did a news conference where he he put the onus on Trump and said, I'm willing to renegotiate NAFTA and look at some of these trade deals. Where are you? Send me your plan. Let's work together on that. And so I think you'll see more of that, like on issues where they do have some common ground on this populist economic agenda. Sherrod will emphasize that. I think on the areas where, where it comes to some of this rhetoric, like what we saw last night about some of these other countries and Trump speaking disparagingly of them. I'm not allowed to say the word, sorry. But you all know what I'm talking about. I think then you'll hear Sherrod Brown criticize that sort of rhetoric as being beneath the presidency and the national discourse.
Sandra?
I agree.
country.
You agree, Karen?
Oh yeah, I think Sherrod Brown made a point of this week that Trump was signing a bill that he had been involved in on fentanyl, and there's another issue that a lot of Republicans and Democrats can get together on in terms of trying to stop this terribly dangerous drug from getting into this country. So yeah, I think Sherrod Brown does speak to a little bit of that, but clearly when it comes to these sorts of issues like the disparagement of people in other countries, the potential that can do in terms of damage to relationships with allies and that sort of thing. I mean, Sherrod Brown's he's got a lot to talk about in that area, I think, in terms of how he views it versus how the president views it.
So we're going to turn over to questions in just a couple minutes here. So if you've got things you want to bring to the panel, start thinking about them. And shortly we'll have people with microphones. Before we do that, though, I want to ask each of you, is there an issue or a storyline in this election in Ohio that you think has not gotten a lot of attention because the oxygen has just been sucked out of the room by so many other newsworthy events? Putting your thinking faces on.
You mean this upcoming election?
Yeah, this election. Do you think there's something that's just not getting a lot of attention that we should be paying attention to? Yeah, I hear gerrymandering.
And that's going to come because we've got two potential ballot issues here. You've got the one that the state lawmakers are working on right now that could come onto the May ballot. And we're still waiting to see exactly what that looks like and whether it will even make it. It's got to be done by February to get to the May ballot. So that could come up, and if that then does come up on the May ballot and it passes, that could affect the citizens groups that are trying to put their own issue that they've been working on for a year and a half onto the November ballot to try to change the way that the congressional map is drawn. So I think that's going to be a big deciding, driving issue, I think, going forward.
Mm-hmm. Sandra, any other issues?
I mean, I think more than an issue, and we've already talked about it, is the governor himself. I mean, he's trying to get some of the air that's left, what's little of it, and he's not getting it here. I mean, he is getting some of it nationally. He's on some of the national shows.
He seems like a regular on the Sunday shows.
Right, yeah.
I think infrastructure is an issue that always gets sidelined, and in the past it wasn't getting any oxygen at all, but with Trump it seemed like it was an issue that was going to take off, and we have this joke every week seems to be infrastructure week at the White House, and it ends up getting sidetracked by the the glib comment of the day. But I think in Ohio it's a very important issue how roads and bridges and sewage lines, all that stuff is maintained, and all that stuff equals jobs as well. And it's something that when you message it right works pretty well. And we're just not talking. It's just not talking about wonky issues like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, today we are enjoying a Friday forum on the year ahead in politics featuring Henry Gomez, political reporter at BuzzFeed, Sindra Miller-Cole, instructor of applied politics at the University of Akron, and Karen Kassler, State House News Bureau Chief at Ohio Public Radio and Television. Our moderator is me, a reporter and producer here at IdeaStream. Now, we're about to begin the audience Q&A, so we welcome questions from everyone. So if you've got questions, you can approach the folks at the microphone here or raise their hand and they'll come around to you. Do we have a first question here?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming together so quickly. This has been very interesting. When Cordray announced he was running for governor, Brent Larkin of the Plain Dealer wrote a column saying that in order to be successful, the Democratic candidate for governor is going to have to raise at least $20 million. So my question to anyone on the panel is, do you agree with that assessment? And if so, where does that Democrat get all that money?
Sandra, you're the campaign finance expert here.
So, I mean, I definitely think that the number is high. I don't know that it's as high as $20 million, but just looking at the money that will be poured into Ohio from everything from the campaigns themselves to the political parties to the PACs and super PACs. Yeah, I mean, to get any sort of airtime, whatever it is that you're spending that money on, it's definitely going to be a lot. Where they get it, I mean, everywhere. It will be everything from the small grassroots events, making sure that people get to know them at the same time as giving a little bit of money to those high dollar events, both across Ohio and DC and everywhere else that there is to give money.
You think they'll have to go out of state to get money?
I do, yeah.
Oh, I think there's no question. And if either Cordray wins or Kucinich wins, they will have a national base that they can turn to, because obviously Cordray is known for being the head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Kucinich, like we've talked about, has been known. So I think that there's an opportunity to go outside. But absolutely they're going to have to. I mean, when you think about the money that Mike Dewine and John Husted had coming into the primary, Mary Taylor was way, way far behind, but whoever wins that race, they're going to get a lot of money too. So yeah, I think $20 million, it sounds like a figure that would make sense in
Henry,
this
do you think
environment.
the candidates are nervous about fundraising, or their people are nervous about, can we actually raise enough money to do this?
I think they should be. I don't know that 20 million is, it sounds like the right amount. But I mean, atmospherically, a lot can happen in Ohio. If Trump's popularity does go down and that becomes more of a referendum type issue on Trump, then I think that really, really helps the Democratic nominee. I do think Mike Dewine is known quantity. He's established. He's got a lot of money with Houston. I think it'd be probably easier for the Democrats if they didn't have somebody who also has spent a long time in public service running against him, because then you could play that angle a little bit more. But outside money, you'll need it. And I don't know how much Ohio will command, because it depends on whether it's seen as like nationally a marquee gubernatorial race. And if DeWine is perceived as a heavy front runner, then that might not help the Democrats raise money. But Rich Cordray, if he's a nominee, he's going to get money from like the Elizabeth Warren network of progressive donors, and I think that'll be helpful to him.
Mm-hmm. We have a next question here.
Hi, thank you for your comments. I appreciate your comments, but it seemed to me there were very, very little comments about issues. It seems today that we're living in the era of the cult of personality. Sindra, you said something about Kucinich doing the Trump model. I'd like to hear more from you about what is the Trump model. Is it just, bombastic rhetoric and false promises? I mean, what is it that, I'd like to know that. And then the alternative, what about the issues? What are the real issues that we're going to hear about, and not just personality in these elections?
We can start with the Trump model
Sure.
question, then we'll move on.
I mean, I see the Trump model as a couple different things. I mean, yeah, it's definitely a lot of talk, but it is some of that like populist. I mean, Henry alluded to that a little bit, but just this whole, I'm going to talk about issues. I'm going to talk about things that make people uncomfortable. I want people to say, like, you know what, that's somebody that's honest. He's not one of these insiders that's stuck on what pollsters say and what the talking heads say, but he's somebody that's really going to go out there and do something for me, average candidate, or average citizen that lives in Ohio. So, I mean, I think that definitely plays into it. But then also this whole notion of, I mean, when Trump was running, I don't know if you remember, but when he would talk about money, it was, I'm not raising money to run for president. That's not how I'm going to do things. Never mind the fact that there were PACs everywhere just pouring money into a Trump candidacy. I mean, super PACs, dark money, whatever it is that you want to call it. There was plenty of money to be had, but he wasn't the one spending it. So then he didn't have to be as accountable as what, some people where the money's coming from the campaigns. And also just, I mean,
Well, I want to go ahead, Henry, and then we'll...
It's become personality driven,
Right.
and it's become even more so because of how Trump won. And yes, you could blame the media for a lot of that, but I think that policy reporters do push candidates on policy. The candidates don't do a great job talking about it. I think if you have seen on the Republican side, Mary Taylor's talked a lot about Medicaid expansion to try to differentiate herself from Kasich, but that also has a personality implication because she's trying to position herself and brand herself as not John Kasich and as somebody that's more in line with base Republicans on healthcare and on Medicaid expansion. You've seen Mike DeWine talk a lot about opioids, and I'm not trying to speak I'm not trying to be cute or glib here. I mean, but that's become like the issue in politics over the last few years, and I think it's become something that's really easy for politicians to talk about because it's an issue that we all understand and all have a great deal of empathy for. But there isn't always substance behind what they're talking about when they're talking about these things. Politician A looks good and caring because he or she is addressing the opioid crisis. Rob Portman used it to great effect in his re-election campaign. No one knew what Rob Portman really was about before his re-election campaign. He'd served one term. It was kind of like with Sherrod Brown. You knew he was about fair trade. You knew that he had this populist image to him, but you didn't really know what Rob Portman stood for. But then Rob Portman made his whole re-election campaign about opioids, and that's what Rob Portman stood for. And I think it helped him, but it also built his personality up too. So I don't know that maybe we don't ask enough questions about infrastructure, which was the issue I mentioned. And when we do, we don't get great answers, so the story just sort of fizzles out and doesn't become it doesn't register as more of a talking point or extended story. Also, the news changes so fast now. I mean, it's something that happened. keep joking about it. Things that happened last week feel like they happened, before Christmas. So.
And another thing, when it comes to the issues, it seems as though, the Republicans are promising this, and when they're in charge, we go this way. And then the Democrats are promising all the way over here. So I think people are getting really frustrated of watching this game of, okay, things get done, promises were made, those promises were fulfilled, and then the next party comes along and completely dismantles what was done before. So no longer are we the voters even? I mean, we're allowing that to happen. We're saying, you know what, sure, Obamacare, yes, we want it. The Affordable Care Act, yes, yes, yes. And then you vote somebody into office who's no, no, no. And now the Democrats are saying, well, wait, yes, yes, yes. And I mean, I just feel like that's where the average voters are just getting lost in this whole, well, what is right? Because if they take it to the extreme and then undo it to the extreme, I don't know what's right. I don't know where we should be on the issue.
Well, I want to follow up actually on another part of the question about false promises, because we saw during Trump's campaign in Ohio and all across the country, he would say things like, we're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it and it's going to be a big wall.
Steel mills are going to reopen.
The steel mills are going to reopen. The coal mines will reopen. We'll have this resurgence of these jobs that have been disappearing for a long time. Do you think that voters are going to get impatient when those promises do not come true?
Well, right. I mean, they saw the tax package. They were happy with that. That was something that he was delivering on. He's, quote unquote, trying with the wall, except those Democrats in Washington, they're just not helping. I mean, I feel like if you look at the people who, I mean, this isn't just specific to Trump, but right now, because he is president, you look at the people that voted for him, they're happy that he's fulfilling a promise here and there, and that he's trying to show that he's working to fulfill more promises. I mean, if you'd ask the president, he's done everything that he can on the wall. He's just waiting for everybody else to deliver. He's done his part on some of the promises that he made, but he is being, those dirty politicians in D.C., that swamp isn't getting drained fast enough, so he can only work so quickly.
Well, and I think that gets to this question that you often see asked in people who are watching national politics, who will go and do the story about, well, how did Trump supporters feel about this latest thing that just happened in the news? This question of, could Democrats ever do something to change the mind of people who voted for Trump to get them to vote for a Democrat? You seem to be suggesting that for people who are for him, they're for him, and what they see confirms that belief.
Right.
Do you think people's minds could be changed, and that Democrats could make an argument to say, hey, he promised this, but it's not quite there, or he didn't deliver?
And I think there's a group, I think there's a group of Republicans who they didn't vote for Trump, but they want to see him succeed now. That they think that what he's doing maybe on the business side is what they want to see, but it's the stuff that's happening, like the comment yesterday and some of these other things that are really, really troublesome. And I think there's a group of moderate people out there that really do fall into that category, that they want to see they want to see less regulation, they want to see more opportunities in business, they like the tax reform package, that sort of thing, but they're appalled and horrified by the comments and the behavior and the exaggerations and the promises and the things like this.
Those are the voters that can and would decide an election. I mean, we've become so tribal now, and I say, I use the royal we as our country, so that a reporter like me can point out to you or to my readers or to a person I'm interviewing over and over again, well, Trump said he was going to do this and didn't do that, and he said he was going to do this and he didn't do that. And you can point out all these facts, but the trust in media has disintegrated, and everybody just retreats to their own corners. That it doesn't matter if I point that out to my readers. If they like Trump, they're going to still like Trump, and it doesn't matter that Mexico's not paying for the wall, and it doesn't. And I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying it's a frustration I have as a journalist, that you can point out all this stuff, and it's like, well, the media said it, so it must not be true, or the media is just, or the whole take Trump seriously, not literally. He's the president of the United States. He said he was going to do these things, and if you're not going to judge him on that, then that's fine, but don't blame me for not writing enough about the fact that he's not doing this or not doing that, or that he said he'd do this and he ended up doing that. It's maddening sometimes. You end up in this loop.
And I think that creates a real problem for all of the Republicans that are running for office, because like Karen pointed out, I mean, there is that group of people who, they don't like the man, but they like the policies. And how closely do you align yourself with the man, the office, the policy? Like, where is that line drawn to be successful and to be able to communicate your message in a way that works?
And I think
Karen.
we've seen some pieces of, where national reporters have gone to Trump country and talked to reporters or talked to voters about Trump. Why did you support Trump? What was it about him that swayed you? And that's been very interesting. It's been interesting to see national reporters come away from Washington, D.C. and come to Youngstown and come to some areas to try to talk to real people, which arguably we should be doing all the time. But I think there's also the other argument of I think we also need to talk to voters who didn't turn out. Why haven't you been coming out to vote? What is keeping you from coming out? I mean, the numbers that turned out for Obama versus the numbers who turned out for Clinton. Why were those numbers down? And just as we look at the effect Trump had on those voters, the effect that Clinton had on Democratic voters, I think there's a really great story there too.
We got a question in the audience here. Yes. Oh, over here first. Then we'll come to you. Don't worry.
The Mandel to Renacci switch, was there a deeper calculus there? And I just asked because I didn't hear anything at all about what the real issue was with Mandel's wife. I don't mean to pry into his personal matters, but I'm surprised there was no follow-up, or maybe I just missed it.
I think it's really touchy for reporters to ask because his wife she's a spouse, a partner, a family member, a child. These are people that are inadvertently involved in politics, and I think we're very sensitive to try to ask questions of those folks because they're dragged into this that maybe they didn't ask for it. But certainly, his wife's illness aside, that is the reason that he said he was leaving the race. There were some questions about Mandel in terms of being able to produce a different result than he did in 2012. I think there were a lot of Republicans who were very concerned about how he performed against Sherrod Brown. I mean, you folks are City Club members. I moderated that debate between Sherrod Brown and Josh Mandel in 2012, and it was unbelievable. And that was the first of 3 unbelievable debates. So I think there was a real concern that Mandel was just not going to be able to deliver that seat, and that maybe somebody else would. So, I mean, I think that's a separate issue to his wife's illness. I don't think that it's comfortable. I'm not comfortable asking about that, but I noted it out there. He is staying in his job as treasurer, but said that the campaign for Senate is too much for him to be doing right now.
I mean, they have 3 young children, and so I think it's you want to take statements like that at face value, and I haven't heard anything to believe otherwise on his reasons for pulling out of the race. But whatever it is, I mean, they're a young couple with a young family to raise. So I think that's obviously. It's weird to us because we're all, those of us in the media are cynical, and even those of us who follow politics tend to be. So it's natural to have the question about, is there something deeper? But I think in this case, it is what it is, and all the stuff Karen mentioned, about the challenge Mandel's going to face, it's absolutely correct. I mean, but Josh is also a young guy. I mean, he's still in his 30s. This might not have been the best political atmosphere for him to run, and now he's not, and he might still have a future down the line if he chooses to. So he's doing what he feels he and his family need to do right now, which that's my take on it anyway.
And it does, his decision, the timing of it does, though, kind of lock him out from anything else. I mean, he will, once his term is up at the end of this year, he will no longer be in office. So I don't know it was a very sudden decision, so you have to assume that there was a very, very serious reason behind it. So that's worth mentioning, I think.
Mm-hmm. Got another question?
I got 2 questions. The first one is, how does tax reform play out on this? I mean, who does that help in the gubernatorial race? How does that play out? How do the Dems play it? How do the Republicans play it? And who does that ultimately help? And the second question is, is Ohio going to elect its first Hispanic congressman in Renacci's seat and its potential successor, Anthony Gonzalez?
It's looking pretty good for Gonzalez right now, isn't it?
I think he's raised the most money of any Republican candidate that I last time I checked anyway, and I'm not sure that what Democrats are planning for that.
It's got to get through a primary too, though, with Christina Hagan, who, I think Gonzalez has got structurally a lot of advantages in that primary because he's got Washington support, he's got donor support. But Christina Hagan is aligned herself very, very closely with the Trump wing of the party. She has a good ballot name. I mean, we talk a lot about ballot names. Hagan is not a bad ballot name to have, and so I'm interested. I mean, I think on paper Gonzalez is favored to win the primary, but he's got to get through that first. And but interesting candidate.
His background with Ohio State football doesn't hurt, right?
Right. Washington Republicans were very excited that they got him into that race. And then you saw Tom Patton kind of get out not long after it became clear that Gonzalez was going to suck up a lot of that money. So.
And on the question of the Republican tax bill, do you see that being something that statewide candidates talk about at all on the campaign trail?
I think it's part of the whole economic issue. I mean, that's one of the issues that kind of gets pushed to the side a little bit in favor of some other things. I mean, Democrats are going to talk about taxes. They're going to talk about especially state taxes and how things have been going over the last couple of years. I mean, the unemployment rate has not dramatically, it's been up and down, but in this area there that's still higher than the national rate. And yet the tax cuts that happened at the state level, we're supposed to do something about that. So Democrats are going to talk about that. Republicans are going to talk about this national tax reform and how they feel that tax cuts have sparked Ohio's economy. So, and brought it back from the recession. What I think is very interesting, and I talked to Budget Director Tim Keene about this week, this whole idea of a year ago, Governor Kasich was talking about we could be on the verge of a recession. And a year ago, we were facing this potential budget crisis where we ended the year, they had to cut $800 million out of the budget because there was this huge hole that was opening up. So the idea of a recession is not that far away. We're in a period where we've had long, sustained economic growth. And what are we going to do the next time we have a contraction in the economy?
Cindy, did you want to add something to that? Or?
I mean, I think one way that voters often vote, and I mean, this is talked about a lot, is, are you better off now than you were 2 years ago, 4 years ago? And I believe that Jim Renacci will really look at the benefits, the potential benefits of the tax plan and use that to his advantage when people are answering that questions. I think that he will definitely latch on to and try to talk about that and take ownership of it as he's running.
And Henry, I'd imagine that you'd hear Sherrod Brown talking about the corporate tax cut side of this, saying, look, this is a giveaway to big business.
Yeah, it'll be a huge issue in the federal races for Senate and for these House races in Ohio, where, and Sherrod, that's an issue that'll be in his wheelhouse, but Renacci's also going to emphasize, he's going to try to play up, do you have a little more money in your paycheck every week? This is just a sign of good things to come for Republicans, but Sherrod's going to emphasize the giveaways to the to the corporate community, which is actually a talking point that would be at home in Steve Bannon's wing of the Republican Party, which is just one of the many ways that there's so many contradictions there.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Renacci miss a vote on the tax reform package because he was campaigning?
I don't know that for sure.
Okay.
We'll have to check that out. We'll give you the answer online.
Okay, there you go.
afterward.
I thought I remember reading that.
We've got another question here. Yes, Matt Zone.
So when you think of voting blocks, there's no bigger voting block than the women vote. And you look at both sides in this election with now Dewine and Houston teaming up, and you have Mary Taylor sitting there. And on the Democratic side, you have Schiavone. Kucinich is probably going to jump in the race. Nan Whaley's out now as a candidate. Betty Sutton has chosen to be a lieutenant governor candidate, and Rich Cordray. What does it look like? And I'd be curious to hear Sandra and Karen's response. And Henry, you could feel free to add at the end. The women block, the women vote, and I will tell you, as somebody who has 5 sisters, my sisters are pretty upset that women are taking a back seat to men in this election.
Well, I think it's telling that all of the gubernatorial tickets right now have a woman on them except for one. So, I mean, to put it bluntly, I think that the candidates themselves definitely see a value to the women in the women's bloc. I also find it interesting, I was talking to some of my Democrat colleagues and friends, and they were a bit ticked that Betty Sutton was Cordray's running mate in the role that she is. They were hoping that it would be the other way, that that Sutton would be at the top of the ticket, or Nan Whaley would be at the top of the ticket, and that Cordray would be coming back to Ohio to help the woman rather than the woman, taking him and carrying him that way. So, and the other thing, right before we came up here, I was reading Martha McSally just declared for Senate down in Arizona, and her comment as she was declaring her race was that the Republican Party needs to grow a pair of ovaries. So, so I think the women are trying.
And that's going to be an interesting race to watch. I mean, Joe Arpaio's in that race, the sheriff. So that race is going to be very interesting to watch, absolutely. But I remember asking a couple of political strategists on our TV show last week, what are the chances? We had all these women. We had 4 women who were running for governor and 2 women who had been named a week ago as running mates. What were the chances that we'd end up with 2 tickets who were all male? Well, we have 1 ticket that's all male. Connie Pillich is now the only woman on the Democratic side who's at the top of the ticket and is still in the race. And I've been told she feels like she's in a good position because she's the only woman at the top of a Democratic ticket right now. It'll be interesting to see who she selects as a running mate. If she selects a woman, that could be extremely interesting. But I think the women's vote is going to be critical. I mean, when you think about the women's marches that were happening a year ago and the mobilization that started there, the question is, did that momentum continue? Is that momentum still in effect today to try to bring people who are very concerned about these issues? Obviously, the whole Me Too movement does galvanize a lot of women to say, hey, we want a bigger role in state legislatures and in governorships and that sort of thing. But that's where it has to start too. It has to start at the local level. It has to start at the state level. These federal candidates, they don't get there, except for Donald Trump, by accident in the sense that they work their way up typically. And so there's been a need for more women at the local and state level for a long time.
We have another question here. Yes.
I do not see much focus and interest in the about the immigration issues, especially in light of TPS, DACA, refugee issues. Even today, if I may say, I don't see more coverage or focus on these really important issues. Another part of that is also international issues that are really affecting our local politics, our local even outcomes here, like North Korea, the Middle East, that again impact us greatly here. So where do you see that going to be played in the media, or even more coverage of that and more focus to bring more attention to this?
Yeah, the question of immigration, I mean, you've had the Immigration and Customs Enforcement say that although border apprehensions are down, arrests within the interior of the United States are up. The acting director of ICE saying that no one is exempt from deportation. They're trying to signal that now that Trump is president, there's going to be a change in outlook on immigration. Henry, do you see that becoming an issue in Ohio?
I don't know about it, Ohio. I think it's covered very extensively at the national level. I mean, it's one of those issues that I think we're seeing a lot of the anecdotal stories. The Plain Dealer has had some pretty good coverage of individual examples of like a family in Lorain County, or the business owner in Youngstown who's who faces deportation despite being a very productive and positive contributor to his community. But I think as far as world affairs go, I think that might play more into Ohio, just because I think when you've got the president tweeting threats to North Korea, that becomes something that alarms everybody or concerns everybody, not just a national electorate, but John and Jane Doe in Ohio. So.
Thank you for not saying Bob and Betty Buckeye.
I almost did, and that's why I came up with
I think, for a while we've had a governor who's been very willing to weigh in on those issues, on all these national issues. I mean, almost every time Trump has said something about a particular issue, you've seen John Kasich tweet out some sort of a response. So there's been some attention here. I think there's going to be a lot more attention on these issues in the Senate race than the governor's race, though. But certainly what the president is saying about those issues is going to come into the discussion in the governor's race, as you've got these 2 tickets that will be trying to decide how far or how closely, for the Republican side, how far away for the Democratic side they want to be removed from the president's opinions as expressed in social media, especially.
Sandra, anything to add to that? Thank you for the question. Do we have another question here?
Yeah, we're actually going to take a question from Twitter at this point.
Okay.
One of the panelists mentioned no, no, no versus yes, yes, yes. It seems there are more instances of moderate politicians retiring or leaving office. Does the panel believe compromise on public policy outcomes will become even more difficult?
Yes.
Yes. Sad to say.
It's hard. I mean, look at Pat Tiberi, who's ran for the exits, and look at Jeff Flake, who 7 years ago was one of the most conservative members of the Senate. I mean, he was rock-ribbed, Chamber of Commerce, libertarian wing Republican, and now he's too moderate for the current Republican Party, and he was going to lose his primary in Arizona. That's the McSally race that Sindra just mentioned. He was going to lose that primary. I mean, he was polling extremely low, and he's had enough. So yeah, there's nothing about the current culture or atmosphere that incentivizes somebody like Jeff Flake, who despite being solidly conservative is willing to compromise on immigration reform, for example.
And I think gerrymandering plays a huge role in that. The fact that the person who wins the primary typically is the one who wins the general election anymore. I mean, when you've got people winning primaries by winning general elections by double digits because the districts are drawn in such a way that it guarantees one party versus the other will win. And right now the balance in Ohio is 12-4. And under the next redistricting proposal, we're potentially going to lose a congressional seat. Who knows what that's going to look like in the future. I think that really contributes to more of that because typically the parties go to the extremes for the primaries, and then if there's no reason to come back toward the center, there's no reason.
I'm looking to my folks in the back here. Do we have time for another question? We've got a couple minutes left. So one more question here. Sir, you can close us out.
Okay. I wanted to know, what does the panel think about where the millennials stand on, the future for Ohio and who do they support?
There was a Quinnipiac poll out in the last couple of days that said they really don't like Trump, really. The thing is, they really don't vote that much, I don't think. That's an issue. I mean, again, we can talk all we want about campaign strategies and who's saying this and who's saying that. In the end, it matters whose voters come out, what voters do when they actually are in, when they're sending in their absentee ballot or when they're actually casting their ballot at their polling place. That's what matters.
Today at the City Club, we're enjoying a Friday forum on the year ahead in politics, and we thank all of you for being here today. That brings us to the end of our forum, so thank you to Henry, Sindra, and Karen. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming
I can't walk
speakers
away.
or for podcasts of the City Club, go
I
to
just mean you gotta
cityclub.org.
unplug
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland Incorporated.